The 817 Street History Channel is a YouTube channel based on the documented history of African American culture in Fort Worth, Texas, and is in no way used to glorify or vilify the individual featured on this platform. All information presented is public record and not reported as fact. Thank you for your support. Suspect in slaying stays jail for now. A man who has served time for beating two people to death and is charged with two more killings will spend at least until Friday in the Tarrant County Jail. Gerald Wayne Douglas asked State District Judge Tom Cave Wednesday to reduce his bail a third time. Cave listened for an hour and then gave prosecutors 2 more days to prepare their case. The Tarrant County grand jury that indicted Douglas in the slaying of Willie Wren last April in South Fort Worth has recommended his bond be set at $300,000. Cave will hear testimony again at 1:30 p.m. Friday before deciding whether to reduce Douglas's bond. Douglas, 33, was released nearly 3 years ago after serving 9 years for murder and for the possession of and sale of heroin. According to Texas Department of Corrections records, he also served nearly 2 years in Tarrant County Jail in the beating death of a fellow inmate. In 1971, when Douglas was 18, he was convicted of beating a fellow inmate to death with his bare hands at the old Fort Worth City Jail. He was indicted on a murder charge, but a Tarrant County jail found him guilty of aggravated assault on Floyd Phillips, says records released in court Wednesday. 3 years later, in 1974, when Douglas was 21, he was found guilty in the murder of Kenneth Wayne Robertson. A Tarrant County jury gave him a 5 to 20-year prison term. Douglas beat the victim to death with his bare hands and feet, say the records. By then, Douglas had already been convicted of 2 separate counts of sale or possession of heroin. In 1973, he was sentenced to 12 years, and in 1974, he was handed a 20-year sentence term for 2 separate Tarrant County juries, court records show. Since his release September the 23rd, 1983, Douglas has been charged with murder and the slaying of Wren, who was last seen April 1985 in South Fort Worth. When arrested in the Wren slaying, Douglas was free on a $90,000 bond after being charged in the slaying of Eric Hampton and the attempted murder and aggravated assault of a Fort Worth woman. The woman is now in the women's haven for battered and abused women and children. A caseworker for the Texas Department of Human Services testified. Vicki McMillan testified that she is the caseworker in the investigation into allegations that Douglas sexually assaulted the woman's son. She later said that the boy is 3 years old. Douglas was arrested May 28th near Waco, and Cave lowered the $250,000 bond that had been set to $50,000 because the prosecution presented little evidence to persuade him to retain the high bond. Douglas was later indicted by a Tarrant County grand jury in the Wren slaying, and Cave reduced the recommended $300,000 bond to $90,000. Assistant District Attorney James McIntyre has produced court and police officers as witnesses during 2 hearings to try to persuade the judge to retain the six-figure bonds. He claims eyewitnesses are so afraid of Douglas that he is reluctant to produce them. But Cave warned McIntyre that he had better produce solid evidence to persuade him to set bail higher. Witnesses can be brought to court. You're not going to be allowed to use hearsay evidence, Cave said in court. It was in McIntyre who requested a 2-day continuance of the case. Gerald Douglas received life in prison on fourth murder charge, November 15, 1986. City's public enemy number one given life term and $10,000 fine. A Tarrant County jury yesterday assessed the maximum punishment, life and a $10,000 fine against Gerald Douglas, who once was called Fort Worth's public enemy number one. Early in the day, the jury convicted Douglas of murder in the May 12, 1986 shooting of Eric Hampton, 21. Douglas, who was being convicted of murder and delivery of drugs once before, also is charged in an unrelated slaying, aggravated sexual assault of a child, and attempted killing and aggravated assault. Prosecutor James McIntyre said, during the punishment phase of the trial in 213th State District Court, Prosecutor Mike Juergens and McIntyre called 4 Fort Worth police officers and 1 investigator for the Texas Department of Public Safety. They all testified that Douglas, 34, had a bad reputation. In an unusual move, Douglas himself delivered part of the closing arguments in his defense. He told jurors that many famous people, including Karl Marx, Sigmund Freud, Beethoven, and the poet Robert Blake, were reputed cocaine users, but are able to go on and live productive lives. Douglas told jurors in Judge George Crendale's court that he shot Hampton in self-defense because he thought he was being robbed, but he said he would not quarrel with their verdict convicting him of murder. Douglas delivered his brief argument after originally choosing to remain in a nearby holding cell during closing statements. Defense attorney said Douglas simply preferred to be by himself as being convicted of murder. He returned to the courtroom after McIntyre told jurors Douglas didn't have the courage to face them, which defense attorney John Lindberger called a cheap shot. During the trial, the dead man's mother, Betty Gibby, testified that Douglas forced her and others to smoke cocaine with him in her home in Fort Worth. Douglas began shooting when he mistakenly believed someone was trying to steal his money, she said. But Douglas told jurors he shot Hampton and another man because they were attempting to rob him during the drug party. He said Hampton pointed a gun at him and the other man, Eugene Brown, raised a tire tool in a threatening manner. Defense attorney Ken Link and Lindberger argued that juries should acquit Douglas because they say the shooting were in self-defense. Lindberger questioned the credibility of Gimby, who said she struck Douglas with a stereo speaker after the shooting, but police pictures of the room showed items covering both speakers, which appeared not to have been disturbed. He said Gimby and other witnesses plotted to rob Douglas, but knew they would have trouble because Douglas was armed. I submit to you, if it was going to be more than a robbery, he said, it was going to be a robbery killing of Gerald Douglas. But McIntyre called self-defense theory a concocted story from Douglas and said Douglas most likely was feeling paranoid because of his repeated drug use. McIntyre reminded jurors of the testimony of Douglas's cousin Fred, who said he didn't see a robbery attempt. Not one witness other than Gerald Douglas, who has the most allude, said a word about the tire tool. She said, "The robbery is a figment of Gerald Douglas's imagination." Douglas first drew headlines last year when former district judge Tom Cave lowered his bond. That prompted Fort Worth Police Chief Thomas Wyndham to ask for Cave's recall. Fort Worth Police dubbed Douglas public enemy number one and put him on their most wanted list because of his reputation of intimidating witnesses into not testifying against him.